Welcome to Friday night's video in our Master Series. This is the 28th video in our Master Series and the 15th video in our editing phase. This is actually the second video in our flow processing, and we're going to have one more after this. In the first video, we talked about flow editing, the concept. And in this video, we're going to get set up and take a couple things into consideration before we get flow editing. And we're going to look at one thing in flow editing you're going to run into that you don't want dynamic differences, and we'll take a look at that. So basically, in this video, we're going to talk about, again, putting up markers on the track like we talked about, and making track notes so that, when you're going through there, that, you've got track notes on them. You should either have track notes in your DAW to where you can make notes on the track, or you can get plugins that have track notes on them so that you can, make some notes about what's going on, and also put up markers, where you got an issue, there's an issue, make sure you make, notes about where things are at after you do a really good critical evaluation of the track. Then also, remember, this can include all types of editing types. And editing types we've already talked about, because when you start correcting, adjusting, and repairing, you might have to revisit some of those editing types we've discussed to make sure things are put together well and you do a good job. So next thing is, you want to edit in context from the beginning to the end, always, and flowing along how the performance is flowing. Always cut at zero crossing when possible, and always duplicate the tracks so you can A/B back and forth, so you can really hear the difference of what you're doing and hear if you're making it better or worse. Really, it's always a really good idea anytime you're doing any type of editing or processing. So next, you want to make sure that you keep in mind that sometimes editing can be subject to how other instruments and other performances interact. So sometimes you might have to listen to other instruments while you're editing that are on different tracks to really get an understanding of how you're going to edit that for your flow editing. And that can happen. As you get better, you'll do that less and less, more than likely. But sometimes it will come up and you will find yourself doing that. I do a lot. So the next thing we want to talk about is make sure you've normalized your track, so that you normalize the track so the loudest parts are as close up to 0 dB as possible, so that you've got the dynamics as loud as possible and the softer parts as loud as they can possibly be on the track to really be able to work on the dynamics well. So after you get done checking those kind of things, the next thing we want to talk about is, we talked about, you might be using all the tools that we've talked about in doing, your editing. So just keep that in mind, the things you might be doing. Also, that to do an analysis of the track is a great idea. They have tools they should have tools in the DAW to do analysis for quantization. These are great tools for so that you are able to get an understanding of where to start and things like that. And no matter what your tool is for quantization, normally it should have a tool to set up where like transients are and things like that. The great thing about this is this will set up markers where there's possibly issues you want to deal with. And you can move the markers. Sometimes that one you can't actually move because it starts dragging the audio. But you go through there and go, I want a marker there. The algorithm puts some markers in there, and you might delete some of them. Some of them you might delete and go, no, I don't want none of those. I want one there. I want one there. That one's a good one. I want to keep that one. That's a good one. This one I don't know about. And you kind of go through it like that. There's a strength that you can set on here that it'll address transients and things like that at various degrees. So you might want to fuss with that some. But it's great because then also, not only do you got markers where all those things, the areas are that you might be stretching or compressing, but also that you can cut on either side really quickly to raise or lower the dynamics of it if you're not using volume automation. And it's most of the time that the algorithm in the DAW will cut at all those markers. So it'll slice and dice up that whole piece of audio all the way across the performance where you've put all these markers really quickly. And it's a very useful tool. So it's something you want to keep in mind, and that works really well. So keep that in mind and fuss with that and see what you can come up with, because it can be a really useful and helpful tool. So next we want to talk about timing. Now, either put a metronome on your track, or you got a bass drum or whatever that you got, a setup timing track that you use. That either way, that way not only you have a visualization of the timeline, but you have it clicking back there. And you have to adjust the volume so it's not causing you to make bad judgments about your decisions when you start actually flow editing. But that way you can really hear when things are starting and stop, and really make some good judgments with a metronome. And always have your level meter out. Always have a level meter set somewhere so you can be judging, levels of what's happening, what's going on. So you are trusting your ears here, you're trusting the metronome, you're trusting your eyes on a level meter and your eyes on track, and you've got quite a few tools there that are really helping you, giving you informative information to help you make judgments about what type of editing you're going to do. So really keep that in mind and use all those tools. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is that with that in mind, that we talked about that you might be using all these editing concepts that we talked about before: audio slipping, dragging pieces of audio around, stretching and compressing audio, things like that, raising and lowering level, just cutting on either side and attenuating and boosted by dragging the actual, the actual audio files, sound level up and down just from the event. And you also have things like, automation. You can use volume automation. We'll show you that a little bit more detail in the next video. And remember, you might revisit some of these things of the timing, ADSR, transient, sibilance, plosive works. You might revisit that some, and that's okay. So don't worry about that. I mean, it's very likely you will anyway. Also, sometimes I'll use like effects on some certain sections and things like that. Most of the time I leave anything animal processor work for the next phase in first phase processing. But there has been an occasion that I have thrown an equalizer on something, fussing with something or something like that while I'm trying to fix something or some other type of plugin. But most of the time I steer clear of that because I save that for my first stage processing. So basically, the first thing in this video, we wanted to address that. We're getting into some more detailed flow editing in the next video. But in this video, we wanted to talk about a type of flow editing that is very simple but may come up a lot, and it's a judgment call you have to make sometimes. Is that, first of all, that when you're flow editing, you have to remember that all these levels there of the performance, there's dynamics happening there. So when you start altering these levels, just don't remember you don't edit the context. Meaning this area you might be editing some levels and lengths and things like that, but you don't want all of a sudden that whole thing to be, this whole area to be really loud when it was basically trying to be in context where it's quieter than this area over here. And now you've screwed up the dynamics to where, it was, going quieter up to loud, and now all of a sudden this is really loud and this is quiet, and you've really screwed up the dynamics. You got to really pay close attention to that and keep an eye on it. That's a huge thing you'll run into, and it takes practice. But if you keep it in mind, it'll really help you. The second thing is that you may run into a chorus or a guitar rhythm or a bass rhythm or something like that that you don't want dynamics in. There's a couple things happening here. First of all, you want it to be all the same level all the way across the track or all across this section. Like let's say this is the chorus that are in green here. You want them all to be the same level, but you don't want dynamics. You don't want there any volume fluctuations. You want them all at the same level as much as possible. So a couple of things to consider. Sometimes waveform densities, this is a denser waveform, it's going to sound just as loud as this, although it looks like it's quieter. That's, that's a given. And also that if this is a lower frequency, it might look smaller. If this is like up around 1500 hertz and this is around way down low, it might look really loud, but it actually doesn't sound as loud. Does that make sense? So you have to make a judgment on that, because sometimes, I work from the equal loudness contour, that the bass end has to be actually up louder, although that your level meters will tell you that it's actually louder than the other stuff, but your ear doesn't hear it that way. If your bass end isn't turned up, it won't hear it as well as things around 500 hertz. And so actually around 500 hertz, it has to be lower than the bass, the lower end. Otherwise, it sounds quieter and you'll hear it. It doesn't sound like they're at the same level. So you have to really keep that in context and really take a look at the equal loudness contour to understand that really well. There's a video on this channel about that. But anyway, you go through there and really loop this to where you get this all to where it's the same level by ear. I don't do any of this with processors most of the time, and I'll tell you why. Because I'll go through and that one's about where I want it. You know, okay, I need that one about there, this one about there, and it sounds about the same level. You turn this one down. I'm checking my meters and stuff too, but I'm trusting my ears on this. And this one sounds like it needs to be up there, and this one needs to be up there. Now, I went through and leveled this. Everything sounds level to me. To my ears, this all sounds level. So I'm going to command bounce that into one audio file, and so that it's done. Now, the concept here is this does not look level, right? Now, if I put a maximizer on this or a compressor, it certainly wouldn't look like that by the time I got done leveling it out, right? Because there's, you know, variations along the waveform that it is level to my ears, but it doesn't look that way. I mean, it's there. You'll run into that sometimes, that it just doesn't look all like flat and squished like it's all the same level across there. Don't worry, later on you're probably going to do some compression on it, maybe not, and almost assuredly throw a maximizer on there if you have one available, because of what a good job it does maximizing tracks while maintaining dynamics when you're finalizing a track. You'll have to wait and see. I'll show you that when I do first phase processing. And you really have to keep that in mind, that it's better to do that by hand and visually doing it yourself, and trusting your eyes and trusting your ears and trusting your meters and things like that, but most of your ears, because it may come out looking like that, but it sounds all basically the same level. You're hearing this jump up just a little bit before it's coming down there. If it's too much, you're going to go in there and do some cutting, you know, bap, bap, you know, and wherever, and make sure you're cutting at zero crossing and bring that towards more level, because you want it. It's like a choir or a chorus section in the background. It's like, and Bob had none, you know, and you don't want it, and Bob had done, and, you know, you don't want it going like that. You want all the same level because it's behind something else going on, or it's a chorus that you just want bam, bam, bam at that same level. It's like Bob went one. You know, you don't want dynamics happening there, and that is one part of flow editing to work on. That, you know, we haven't worked on time, if it's in time or not, or if we want to stretch and compress or anything, but just the dynamics, and it's a real simple way to do it. Don't worry, later on we'll do it doing some compression and some dynamic work with maximizers. Now, there has been some times where I'll just go nope, and I'll throw a compressor on there right now and squish it up a little bit because that's the way I want it, rather than cutting the heck out of 3 or 4 or 5 transients across there that I didn't fuss with correctly. But most of the time, as you had seen before in their videos, I fuss with it by hand, and then if it's going to need compression or maximization or anything like that other than what I've already done, that's going to happen when I do my first phase processing. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I hope you enjoyed this second video in our flow editing. In the next video, we'll get into a little bit more deeper flow editing and some more in-depth flow editing, so when we're doing stuff on very minute and minuscule levels throughout a track. So peace, hope, love. I hope you enjoyed this second video in our flow editing, and you're all set up for the next video, and I'll see you in the next video.